In a time of closed-off machines and proprietary firmware, is it still worth it to do your own upgrades, put in a little bit of extra work, and save some money? So a while back, BigTree Tech sent over a handful of the items from their Panda line. I was reviewing one of their sweet blue cool plates, and I asked them if they'd send me one of the tiny ones for the A1 Mini that they had just released, and this is what they sent over. So first, yeah, there was a tiny build plate in there, which is what I asked for, and that's super nice, and I was stoked. Because those plates are great, and they keep the chamber temperature down because you don't have to have the bed as hot. It still just sticks to your pieces. I plan to be talking about these build plates more in the future, but in this video, we're going to talk about the other stuff that came in the package with the tiny build plate. Here's the whole list of what we got. First off, we have a lightened faceplate, complete with their reworked cooling duct, a new hardened extruder gear set, complete with the drive and idler gears, a lightened extruder frame to house the new gear set, made out of sweet CNC milled aluminum, and finally one of these Panda lighting kits, just for the heck of it. So today we're going to show you a quick video on installing these mods and what it can do to a P1S if you're installing them on that machine. These are compatible with the X1 Carbon as well if you want to replace the stock hardened internals on that, but we thought P1S, we're going to make it X1 Carbon spec. So we're going to talk about the benefits that will afford us in this machine. We'll print some models to make sure everything's working and show how the experience is different with these new pieces. And since the machine will now be upgraded with fancier pieces, comparable to what you would find in a more expensive machine, we're going to talk about the price difference between buying a P1S and these mods, or buying an X1 Carbon that's already got this stuff straight out the gate. And really, I don't like tinkering anymore because those days are behind me, and I just like opening a printer and having it do the stuff out of the box. So I really hope it's worth the effort. Alright, we're going to fly by these as quick as we can because there's a lot to cover and a little bit of time. So, what are all these individual pieces, and what do they do? On their own, each of these pieces are a really cool incremental upgrade that can be added to your machine, but when you combine them together, something especially cool happens. First of all, the Panda Jetpack. This is effectively a super fancy faceplate that replaces the one on the front of your machine.
So I'm curious about...
So we can do the weight stuff?
Yeah.
I'm really interested. At first I thought this was simply a cosmetic upgrade, which is totally cool, but I also like stuff to be functional. So as I thought about it a little bit more and compared the two pieces, engaged my brain a little bit, it became clear there's a little bit more to this. The Panda Jetpack has two major advantages over your stock one. So for reference, hold that, that's 19 grams. How many grams do you think that one weighs? Based on that's your 19 gram reference.
Maybe 17.
Okay, so you think 17 grams there, so how many grams do you think that weighs? This is really hard to tell, and I know we're conditioned because like, they made a light thing, so we think it's lighter.
Okay, we'll go 14.
14. 17 grams, 14 grams. Wow.
26.1?
Wow. Okay. So hopefully it's less. 21.7. So that is pretty significantly less. I guess slap the fan in that boy. The first is the weight advantage. This is printed out of nylon using a 3D printing process called MJF. So not the same as FDM. You can achieve a lot more detailed models using MJF. That means it's going to be lightweight, strong, and it's going to resist all the high heat that it's going to be exposed to being right at the business end of the tool head. Now, using math and science on our super well-calibrated scientific scale, we can determine that this piece is around 20% lighter than the stock piece. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but when you're achieving the speeds that these bamboo ones do, and you're flinging that tool head back and forth so fast, I feel like weight advantages are massively increased when you're talking about those speeds. But that's not the whole story. BigTree's chasing lightness in all of these pieces, not just that front faceplate. They're doing that for a really specific reason, but more on that later. The second advantage that this piece offers is an updated cooling fan duct. And this is really cool. It's really cool. Cooling fan.
That goes right into rocking the Rise Against.
I was listening to Rise Against the last couple days as well, dude. Looking all the way back to the days of the Ender 3, and even further on, I'm sure, it was a pretty common upgrade for people to print a new fan duct. Stock fan ducts often only blew the air onto one side of the nozzle, so it was common to print a new fan duct that would blow air on both sides of the nozzle. This would allow for better cooling and more consistency in your quality of extrusion and all sorts of good things. Now, since then, Bamboo and all the other manufacturers pretty well understand that from the factory you need to have cooling on both sides of the nozzles, and they have fan ducts to do that. But in a similar vein, like a wind vane, right? Fan duct. Whoever's writing these episodes, my goodness. This upgrade redirects the airflow from just both sides of the nozzle to 4 individual vanes. These 4 nozzles allow for a lot more consistent part cooling, kind of in all directions around the workpiece, which is ensuring the best possible quality. Regardless of what direction the tool head's traveling, you're getting the same kind of part cooling. Great, so Panda Jetpack, good. Lots of good stuff going on in there. But why the Hardened Extruder gear set?
Nice. Yep. Because that's how you change out that cutter blade too. No, it's fantastic. It's all the same screws.
Yeah.
So there should be plugs. No, they're not plugs. That's right. Sick.
The Panda Claw gear set is perfect for use with abrasives. So things like carbon fiber reinforced composites, glass fiber filaments, even glow-in-the-dark filaments. Those are the ones you don't want to use unless you know you have a hardened setup all the way throughout. The stock pieces, being stainless or sometimes plastic in some cases, can get worn down by the filament passing through it. So that means slowly, or not so slowly depending on what those pieces are, everything's just going to eat itself to death. But with the hardened setup, we can print away with no consequences.
I thought I had a 0.4 hardened steel one, but I guess I only have a 0.6. I'm just a springy boy, okay. Okay.
The install is pretty straightforward, even though if you look at it, you're really exploding your whole hot end into every single piece that you possibly could. But I promise, it's straightforward. Like once you take off the faceplate, the whole extruder assembly comes off with 3 screws, more or less. From there, we're just disconnecting some plugs, removing a couple of more screws from the assembly, and before you know it, you're down to the level where you're removing the gear set, and everything kind of goes smoothly from there. And especially if you have that new Lightened Extruder case, everything goes back together pretty simply, but differently.
Should be good enough. Good. Good. And then we can use this screw. Has stayed on there.
So the last piece of the lightning puzzle here is that extruder case. It's a CNC'd aluminum piece, and it's made to work perfectly with all these other pieces or your stock setup, while keeping strength where it's supposed to be and adding lightness. No weight penalty. Now the reason why we're focusing so much on weight, and the reason why all of these pieces we're installing are lightened to a degree, is because the chunky gears that we're putting in there are nice hardened metal. And as such, those are heavier than your stock setup. And in fact, it's probably heavy enough that if we just put in the hardened gears, it would add enough weight to the system that you may have adverse printing artifacts due to the extra weight of that tool head flinging around. But luckily, when all these components are added together in one fell swoop, the tool head weighs nearly exactly the same as the standard setup. That means your printer is operating under the exact same forces as it was meant to when it came from the factory, but you get all the advantages of a hardened setup. No accelerated wear due to reciprocating mass, no additional print artifacts. You just put everything back in the case and send it home, buddy.
Screws. Sick. We're at the home stretch. Lose his tool. So we got this guy off of there. Just in case, I'm gonna put this grease. Yeah. In here. These will have to do a bit of a... Okay, that kind of makes sense. Oof.
So our lightened aluminum case has everything that you need to put it all back together and fit all the components in there, just like the stock case. This does come with an additional advantage because there's new hardware and bearings going in, so that's nice. In fact, all of these pieces come with new hardware to a degree, so really we're just upgrading just about everything we're touching. It's a well thought out system. There's a lot of weight reduction with super lightened components. But there's one more light component that we need to install.
So, yeah, it gets its power up in here somewhere.
This is the Panda Lux, and I promise it's one of those mods that if you've looked at it and thought you didn't need it, once you have it, you'll know that you do in fact need it. And honestly, the difference that the addition of this light makes is really hard to accurately portray, but I'll do my best to explain to you what value it's adding. Because on one hand, like, You're adding a light to the machine, kind of, who cares, right? But once you have it, I'm serious, everything gets much easier. Each time I glance at a print from across the room when I look up from my computer, I can pretty well see what's going on with the print and if we're having any issues. So I'll likely be getting another one of these because previously it's not something I would have purchased on my own, but now that I have it, I understand. It's necessary. My X1 Carbon, super dim. Need to get a light. And the install was an absolute pleasure. Just like anything BigTree does, they make it as easy as possible, minimal modification if any, and this thing is no different. You take one of the plugs out and you kind of hijack it to power both of your lights that are in your machine instead of just the one that you're adding or just the stock light. So the kit comes with this little baby board. You unplug the stock light, plug it into this new board. You plug in the new light to that new board as well, and then you take a jumper wire and plug all of that into the stock position. And really the most difficult part here was finding where we wanted to double-sided tape the new board on the inside of the machine. I mean, that's it. Once you plug the thing in, now you've suddenly got loads of light and you can see what's going on inside your machine. Like that. It's like everything BigTree does. It's the most simple thing, and the process to install it is as simple and user-friendly as possible. But it's like, how can we do the simple thing and add the most value to the consumer? So with all these mods in place, I wanted to print a couple of things to make sure everything was functioning properly, and I also wanted to check out what a 0.42 layer height looked like.
That's great. They give you brand new screws for it.
Oh, that's good. There we go. Gently. Trying to be very gentle. There it is. Get more gingerly. A lot more doing than I was expecting. How nice and upfitted you are. So when we swapped all the extruder stuff, I actually threw in a 0.6 nozzle instead of a 0.4 nozzle, just so I could mess around with it for a little bit, because this is something I got from Bamboo quite a while ago, just in case I wanted to bump up to a bigger size. Figured now is as good a time as any. But beyond that, the 0.4 that was on there was a stainless nozzle, and that's not going to be sufficient for the materials that I wanted to print with. And of course, this nacho printed flawlessly.
You ready?
I'm ready for it. Yeah, send it home, buddy. Be very sad. Now, the neat thing about Polybox is it's got this little deal there. You can push the filament right into that when you're not using it. Right now, you would just stick it in there and then you push it into the box. So then when you pull it out, it comes out. And then you don't have to break into the box. Brittle as heck. Even though I'm using a Polymaker Fibron PETCF, I used the Bamboo PETCF profile to print with it. I printed a second nacho out on one of the cool plates with the bed set to 40 degrees. And that, combined with a hot end temperature of 280 instead of 270, actually resulted in a little bit better part. Also, the first one tried to tear apart the stock PEI textured bed really bad, so moving to a smooth bed was going to be a must using these materials. But that allowed me to find out that the temperature might need to be bumped up a little bit because it looked like the bottom layers didn't adhere to each other super well. So looking at this model after a couple of tweaks, it looks like everything that we've done to this printer so far hasn't resulted in any issues. It's all working super well. The layers stack consistently, the extrusion is consistent throughout the whole model. The resolution is really chunky because there's thick layers, but it's not all that noticeable on this model because there's not too many fine details trying to be resolved anyway. There's no stringing to speak of, and these surfaces look excellent. So I'm totally a believer. I'm not a tinkerer. I want my machine to just work out of the box, but this is a system that anybody can install. So when I moved to Bamboo, I didn't need to tinker anymore because I didn't need to maximize the performance of my machine. Bamboo out of the box, you got a super sweet setup that's going to do everything that you need it to do. You don't need to squeeze any more juice out of it. Well, that's what I thought, and it turns out maybe you do need to tinker a little bit. It's much better to buy a P1S, buy these upgrades, and install them yourself. The little bit of work is actually going to end up saving you money, and you end up with the same performance that you would get from an X1 Carbon. Think about it. X1C costs like $1,400 or whatever for the combo. A P1S combo is like $900, okay? So $500 cheaper. And if you spend like an extra $100, you can get everything that we talked about today and you're right in line with an X1 Carbon, just like that. So you save like 400 bucks, so you could spend 20 bucks from there and get one of the cool plates if you'd like. You can spend 60 bucks and get one of the Panda Touches as well, and then you really have a machine that's like an X1 Carbon. I don't know, for me it's kind of a no-brainer. And these days I spend much less time working on my machines than I used to. But first and foremost, I'm cheap. And if I can get the X1 Carbon experience and performance for hundreds cheaper, I'm gonna do the work. Bye.